Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso defy ECOWAS, a new dawn or a dark future. For the first time in nearly half a century, three nations, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, have walked away from West Africa's most important alliance. Stop and think about that for a moment. Imagine if three U.S. states, Texas, Florida, and Pennsylvania, suddenly announced they were leaving the Union. What would that mean for America's economy, its security, and its very survival as a nation? That is the shock now unfolding in Africa. Since 1975, the Economic Community of West African States, better known as ECOWAS, was designed to be the glue that held the region together. Its mission sounded noble, even inspiring. Build a single economic space, defend democracy, and above all, protect citizens from the chaos of coups and conflict. For nearly 50 years, that promise gave millions of Africans hope. But today, that hope is collapsing. When ECOWAS was first created, leaders envisioned something like a United States of West Africa. Borders would be open. Farmers could sell crops across frontiers. Students could travel freely for education. Soldiers from one country would defend another in times of crisis. It was a dream of solidarity, a dream born from the painful legacy of colonial rule. And for a time, progress seemed possible. Trade agreements were signed. A regional passport was created. Peacekeepers were deployed to countries in turmoil, from Liberia to Sierra Leone. Many believed the region was finally learning to stand together. But behind the speeches and ceremonies, cracks widened. Corruption drained resources. Terrorist groups spread across the Sahel. Poverty deepened. And while ECOWAS held endless conferences, villages were burned, schools were shuttered, and families buried their dead. Nowhere was this failure felt more deeply than in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, the three countries that would ultimately walk away. The Sahel, a vast band of desert stretching across Africa, became a battlefield. Extremist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS swept through remote towns. Kidnappings became common. Farmers were chased from their fields. By the 2010s, entire regions were ungovernable. Citizens looked to ECOWAS for help, but instead of protection, they saw delay. Instead of reinforcements, they saw sanctions. Instead of unity, they saw division. A father in northern Burkina Faso put it simply, "We called for help. Nobody came. The terrorists came instead. His land is dry, his harvest small. He once relied on crossing the border to Nigeria to sell his goats to buy rice to keep his children fed. But sanctions cut that lifeline. The border closed. Prices doubled. His children now eat once a day, if at all. Or take the mother in Burkina Faso. Her husband was killed defending their village from militants. She fled with her children to the capital, hoping for safety. But the city is crowded, food is scarce, and ECOWAS sanctions mean aid is harder to deliver. She looks at her children at night and whispers, "We are forgotten." Stationed at a desert outpost, he has little ammunition and no backup. He has heard of ECOWAS conferences, of leaders in suits making declarations. But he has never seen an ECOWAS soldier fight beside him. "If not us," he asks his commander, "then who will defend our people?" They are the daily reality of millions in the Sahel. And they explain why, after years of disappointment, these nations chose to walk away. In January 2024, the governments of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso made it official. They were withdrawing from ECOWAS. The announcement shocked the continent. After nearly 50 years, the marriage was over. In their place, the three nations announced a new alliance, the Alliance of Sahel States, (ALICEN). Its goals were ambitious: a joint military force, stronger borders, and independence from foreign dictates. To many, it felt like a declaration of sovereignty, a chance to finally break the cycle of dependence. But independence comes with risk. These nations are among the poorest in the world. Their economies are fragile. Their militaries are stretched thin. By leaving ECOWAS, they have cut themselves off from vital trade networks and diplomatic protections. Yet for ordinary citizens, symbolism mattered. For people who had waited too long for salvation, even the idea of standing alone felt more dignified than waiting in vain. And so we arrive at the central dilemma. Is this the birth of a stronger, more independent Africa, or the beginning of a dangerous unraveling of regional unity? For Africans, the decision carries both pride and peril. For the world, it raises urgent questions. What happens when alliances break? Who fills the vacuum? And who pays the ultimate price? Think of your own family. If the roof of your house were collapsing, would you stay and hope someone repaired it? Or would you walk away and try to build something stronger? That is the choice Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have made. A choice born of desperation, fueled by pride, and shadowed by uncertainty. But how did it come to this point? What history, what failures, what betrayals pushed these nations to risk everything on such a bold, uncertain path? The answer lies in the story of their long and troubled relationship with ECOWAS. To understand why Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso walked away from ECOWAS, we must return to the beginning. In 1975, West African leaders signed the Lagos Treaty, creating the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. Their dream was clear: to build a united regional bloc that could rival the European Union. Borders would open, trade would flourish, citizens would travel freely, and, most importantly, nations would defend each other against the chaos of coups and civil wars that had scarred Africa since independence. For years, this dream carried hope. Peacekeeping forces were deployed to Liberia and Sierra Leone in the 1990s, preventing total collapse. A common passport was introduced. The language of unity echoed through capitals from Dakar to Abuja. But while the vision was ambitious, the reality was fragile. By the early 2000s, extremist groups were spreading across the Sahel. Vast, ungoverned deserts became training grounds for militants linked to Al-Qaeda and later ISIS. Mali fell into civil war in 2012 when jihadist groups seized entire cities in the north. French troops intervened, but the violence never ended. Niger, though resource-rich with uranium, became a target of cross-border raids. Burkina Faso, once stable, was engulfed by attacks that displaced over 2 million people. Villages were burned, schools closed, and farmers fled their fields. The people turned to ECOWAS for protection. But instead of decisive action, they saw inaction. Leaders met in luxury hotels, issuing statements, while ordinary citizens buried their dead. A trader in Ouagadougou asked bitterly, "What is the value of an alliance that cannot even keep our roads safe?" Burkina Faso, 2022. A young captain, Ibrahim Traore, seized power, declaring that he would do what politicians and ECOWAS could not: defend his people. Niger, 2023. Soldiers toppled the elected government, claiming they could no longer tolerate leaders who allowed villages to fall into extremist hands. For ECOWAS, these coups were unacceptable. The organization was built on a principle: zero tolerance for unconstitutional seizures of power. To deter further coups, ECOWAS imposed punitive sanctions. Borders were closed, banks froze transactions, electricity exports were cut. But these sanctions, intended to pressure generals, ended up crushing ordinary families. In Niger, food prices doubled within weeks. In Mali, hospitals ran out of medicine. In Burkina Faso, students dropped out of school because borders were sealed and scholarships suspended. Instead of weakening military juntas, sanctions hardened their stance and inflamed anti-ECOWAS sentiment. Crowds began waving Russian flags, chanting for Moscow to replace Paris and Abuja as their protector. By late 2023, the rift was irreparable. Leaders of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso declared that ECOWAS no longer represented them. They accused the bloc of being manipulated by foreign interests, especially France, and of punishing citizens instead of defending them. In January 2024, the three governments announced their withdrawal. The divorce was final, but they did not leave to stand alone. Instead, they formed a new bloc, the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. Unlike ECOWAS, which focused on trade and diplomacy, AES centered on one goal: survival through military strength. The three nations pledged to create a joint force of 5,000 soldiers, to share intelligence, and to defend one another against extremist groups. Their rhetoric was defiant. Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso declared, "We will no longer wait for outsiders to protect us. We will protect ourselves." For many citizens, the announcement was more than politics. It was dignity. After decades of dependency, they felt their nations were finally taking control of their destiny. Yet beneath the pride lay grim questions. These countries are among the poorest in the world, ranking at the bottom of the Human Development Index. Their economies are small, their militaries underfunded, their infrastructures weak. Can they truly survive outside the trade networks of ECOWAS? Can they withstand terrorist groups without broader support? Can three fragile states, bound more by desperation than strength, succeed where an entire regional bloc has failed? A grandmother in Niamey captured the dilemma. When children leave their home too soon, they may feel free. But freedom without food, without protection, is only another kind of suffering. What began as a dream of unity in 1975 had nearly 50 years later ended in division. For Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, the gamble was enormous. For ECOWAS, the blow was devastating. For Africa, the consequences remain uncertain. The question now is not whether these nations can stand apart, but whether the world around them will allow them to survive. As celebrations filled the streets of Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou, alarm bells rang in other capitals. What would ECOWAS do? How would the great powers respond? And was this truly independence, or the opening act of an even greater crisis? When Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso declared they were leaving ECOWAS, the announcement hit the region like a thunderclap. For some, it was liberation. For others, it was betrayal. But for almost everyone, it was a shock. Analysts and commentators quickly reached for a metaphor that captured the drama: divorce. ECOWAS, they said, was a marriage that had lasted nearly half a century. The vows were unity, cooperation, and mutual defense. But after years of neglect and broken promises, the marriage collapsed. One Nigerian analyst described it bluntly: when a marriage no longer protects, you walk away. ECOWAS failed to protect. These three nations are simply filing for divorce. On social media, citizens compared their governments to spouses finally leaving an abusive relationship. The symbolism resonated deeply, especially in societies where family bonds carry immense meaning. In the capitals of Bamako, Ouagadougou, and Niamey, thousands poured into the streets. Some waved national flags. Others carried portraits of their new military leaders, hailing them as heroes who had stood up to a powerful regional bloc. Crowds shouted, "Well, we are Sahel. We will stand alone." Women ululated in celebration, saying their children would no longer be punished by sanctions imposed in foreign capitals. For many, it was a moment of hope, a symbolic rebirth. Yet even amid the celebrations, fear simmered. Shopkeepers worried that new restrictions would choke off trade. Parents wondered whether medicines would arrive in time for their sick children. Students questioned if universities abroad would still recognize their degrees. A teacher in Bamako confessed, "We are proud, yes, but pride does not buy chalk for our classrooms. Pride does not stop the terrorists at our door." Across the rest of West Africa, the reaction was alarm. Leaders in Abuja, Accra, and Dakar feared that the breakaway might trigger a domino effect. If Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso could leave, why not Guinea, already suspended from ECOWAS after its coup? Why not others frustrated by sanctions and economic struggles? The survival of ECOWAS itself was suddenly in question. An organization that once prided itself as Africa's most successful regional bloc now faced an existential crisis. One ECOWAS diplomat admitted privately, "If the family splits today, who will stop the house from collapsing tomorrow?" France. Once the dominant power in its former colonies, France had already been expelled militarily from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. The withdrawal from ECOWAS was the final humiliation, erasing what little influence Paris still held. French officials worried openly that they had lost an entire region to rivals. Russia. Moscow wasted no time filling the vacuum. Through Wagner mercenaries and new agreements, Russia offered weapons, training, and political support. Russian flags waved at rallies as citizens hailed President Vladimir Putin as a friend. For the Kremlin, the message was clear: every step Africa takes away from the West is a victory for Russia. China. Beijing took a quieter approach, watching with interest while continuing to invest billions in infrastructure. For China, the collapse of ECOWAS was not just a political shift. It was an opportunity to deepen its long-term economic grip on the continent. United States. In Washington, policymakers hesitated. Should they condemn the military regimes for undermining democracy? Or should they recognize the danger of leaving the Sahel to Russia and China? American bases in Niger, vital for counterterrorism operations, suddenly seemed vulnerable. Silence, for now, became the U.S. Response: echoes of America's own past. In 1861, several southern states seceded from the Union, claiming they were defending their way of life. What followed was the bloodiest conflict in American history, the Civil War. The lesson was sobering. When unity shatters, blood often follows. Could West Africa now be marching down that same road? In Ouagadougou, a young soldier summed up the mood. "We have taken our destiny into our own hands." But destiny is not enough. We need food. We need allies. We need hope. Our nations are like children leaving the house without protection. And yet, amid the risks, many citizens insisted the suffering was worth it. They believed that even if times grew hard, at least they would suffer under their own flag, not under the dictates of an outside bloc. This fragile hope of dignity through independence was the emotional peak of the breakaway. But hope, like unity, can fracture quickly. And so, as Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso celebrated their bold new path, the question loomed: was this truly independence? Or was it the first step into deeper chaos? The answer would soon appear, not in speeches or parades, but in the daily lives of ordinary families struggling to survive the consequences. When three nations walk away from a half-century-old alliance, the decision is not made in conference halls. It is lived on the streets, in the markets, and in the homes of ordinary families. The consequences of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso leaving ECOWAS are already being felt, and they reach far beyond Africa. In Niamey's central market, merchants complain that rice prices have doubled since the sanctions and withdrawal. Mothers walk from stall to stall, clutching coins, only to realize they cannot afford enough to feed their children for the week. In Ouagadougou, buses no longer run regularly because fuel imports are disrupted. Children walk miles to school, if their schools are still open. Many are not. Teachers, unpaid for months, have abandoned classrooms. In Bamako, doctors face empty shelves. Pharmacies run out of antibiotics and vaccines. Parents crowd hospitals, begging for medicine. A Malian nurse explained it painfully. We are fighting disease with empty hands. Politics has stolen the medicine from our children. Sanctions designed to punish generals have instead punished families, driving them deeper into poverty and despair. Beyond hunger lies another danger: insecurity. Without ECOWAS coordination, border controls are weaker. Intelligence sharing has collapsed. Extremist groups exploit the vacuum. In northern Burkina Faso, militants recently overran several villages, displacing thousands. Aid agencies warn that refugee camps may soon overflow. In Mali, jihadist attacks have resumed in areas once thought secure. A soldier admitted bitterly, "We are proud of our independence, but pride does not stop bullets. Alone, we are weaker than ever." Each new attack strengthens extremist networks, giving them more territory, more recruits, and more power to destabilize the region. Politically, the break has emboldened military rulers. Generals and captains who seized power in coups now claim legitimacy as defenders of national sovereignty. Crowds cheer them, but critics warn this is a step backward into authoritarianism. History offers grim reminders. After independence in the 1960s, many African nations embraced strongmen who promised stability but delivered corruption and stagnation. Could history now be repeating itself? The risk is not limited to the Sahel. Other nations, frustrated with ECOWAS, may follow the same path. Guinea, already suspended, watches closely. If the dominoes fall, the dream of a united West Africa could vanish entirely. As instability deepens, families flee. Some walk for days to reach overcrowded cities. Others dream of reaching Europe. They cross the desert, board flimsy boats, and risk the Mediterranean. Many do not survive. Every wave of migrants creates ripples far beyond Africa. Italian ports strain under arrivals. French suburbs debate integration. Even in the United States, immigration debates echo with consequences of African instability. The vacuum left by ECOWAS is not empty. Other powers are moving in quickly. Russia expands its influence through Wagner mercenaries, offering weapons and protection. In the streets of Bamako, Russian flags fly where French flags once burned. For Moscow, each alliance is not just strategy, it is revenge against the West. China strengthens its economic grip. With loans, railways, and dams, Beijing becomes the indispensable partner. For African leaders, Chinese money feels more reliable than Western promises. Europe faces the crisis most directly. Each attack in the Sahel, each failed harvest, means more migrants crossing into Europe. Leaders in Paris, Rome, and Berlin debate whether to intervene militarily or to fortify their borders instead. The United States stands at a crossroads. Washington depends on Niger for drone bases vital to counter terrorism. But with Niger pulling away, those bases may no longer be secure. Policymakers ask, should America risk deeper involvement or retreat and let Russia and China dictate Africa's future? For Americans over 60, the story feels eerily familiar. During the Cold War, small nations became battlegrounds for superpowers. Vietnam, Angola, Afghanistan. Each conflict began as a distant struggle, but soon demanded American attention. The lesson is clear. Instability ignored abroad eventually finds its way home. And yet, beneath the geopolitics, the truth remains human. Fathers unable to feed children, mothers searching for medicine, children forced from classrooms to refugee camps. A grandmother in Niamey said it with heartbreaking simplicity. We may be free, but freedom without food is just another kind of prison. Is it the dawn of a stronger Africa, born from pride and self-determination? Or is it the beginning of chaos that will scar generations, fueling terrorism, migration, and instability across continents? And for America, the question is just as urgent. Will we watch from a distance, or will we recognize that when distant fires burn, the smoke always finds its way home? Because in the end, unity, whether in Africa or in America, is fragile. Once broken, it is the children who suffer first.